70 head of scrawny, half-starved cattle. That was Alessia Lawson's answer to the worst drought Oakhaven County had seen in 3 generations. When she auctioned the farm's only combine to buy them, the locals called her crazy. They stopped laughing when those very cows unearthed the $1 million secret buried in the brush. Alessia Lawson stood on the warped wooden planks of her farmhouse porch, her arms crossed tight against her chest as the auctioneer's gavel fell with a sickening final crack. The sound echoed across the parched, cracked earth of the Lawson family farm, officially transferring ownership of her father's pristine Case Wine H9250 combined to a corporate holding company 2 states over. It sold for $240,000, barely enough to satisfy the crushing balloon payment her father had hidden from her before his fatal heart attack 6 months prior. To the outside world, and specifically to the generational farmers of Oakhaven County, selling the combine right before the desperate, meager autumn harvest was tantamount to a surrender. A farm without a combine was just a patch of dirt waiting to be swallowed by the bank. Gonzalo West certainly thought so. Gonzalo, the owner of the sprawling West AgriCorp that bordered Alicia's property on 3 sides, leaned against the hood of his immaculate King Ranch pickup, a smug, satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He adjusted his Stetson, walked over to the porch, and offered a hand that had never seen a day of actual blistering labor. "It's a tough day, Abby," Gonzalo said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Arthur loved that machine, but you're doing the smart thing, cut your losses. You know my offer for the land still stands. It's more than fair, considering the soil is baking into ceramic." "Oh." Alessia ignored his outstretched hand. She stared past him, watching the heavy transport truck idle, waiting to haul away the mechanical heart of her farm. "The land isn't for sale, Greg. I told you that in April, I told you in June, and I'm telling you now in August." Gonzalo chuckled, a dry, patronizing sound. "But you have no harvester, Abby. You have 300 acres of dying corn and 80 acres of impenetrable locust thorn down in Miller's Gulch. The bank is going to take it all by Christmas. Sell it to me now and you can walk away with some dignity, maybe open a boutique in town." "Get off my property, Greg," Alessia said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a steel that made the older man blink. As Gonzalo drove away, kicking up a trail of suffocating white dust, Alessia's foreman, Samuel O'Donnell, walked up the steps. Samuel was 62, with a face weathered like old saddle leather and a loyalty to the Lawson family that bordered on a fault. He held a clipboard with the auction paperwork, his hands trembling slightly as he handed it over. "Checks cleared, boss," Samuel said quietly. "We've got the bank off our necks for another 6 months, but how are we getting the corn in? What's left of it, anyway?" "We aren't," Alessia replied, turning to look at him. Her eyes, a striking pale green, were completely devoid of surrender. "The corn is a total loss, Sam. Even if we harvested it, the yield wouldn't cover the diesel fuel to run the trucks to the silo. The drought took it. We need to pivot." "Pivot to what?" Samuel asked, his brow furrowing. "Abby, there ain't a drop of water in the creek. The municipal irrigation ration has been cut to 10%. We are sitting on an anvil inside a furnace." "I'm going to Caldwell County tomorrow," she said, stepping off the porch. "There's a livestock liquidation auction. A ranch out of Texas is dumping a massive herd of Coriene crossbreeds because they don't have the feed." Samuel froze. "Cows? Abby, you just said we have no water. We definitely don't have grass. What are they going to eat? The dust?" "They are going to eat Miller's Gulch," she said, pointing toward the southern edge of the property. Miller's Gulch was an 80-acre scar on the land. It was a steep, jagged ravine completely choked with invasive buckthorn, wild blackberry, poison ivy, and honey locust trees with thorns the size of 10-penny nails. It was so dense that a man couldn't walk 10 feet into it without a machete. For 3 generations, the Lawson family had ignored it, letting it grow into a feral, impenetrable jungle. "That's suicide for cattle," Samuel argued, his voice rising in panic. "Corrientes are tough, but they ain't goats. They'll get cut to ribbons and they'll starve." "I've done my research," Alessia shot back. her tone leaving no room for debate. Coincidental Brahmin crosses are aggressive foragers. They evolved in scrubland. They will eat the buckthorn leaves, strip the bark off the locusts, and trample the briars. They'll clear that gulch, Sam. And then what? And then, Alessia said, looking out at the dying sun, we will have 80 acres of prime, cleared pasture ready for planting when the rains finally come back. It's the only part of the farm the bank doesn't have a specific lien on, because they deemed it unusable wasteland. I'm going to make it usable. When the 3 rattling livestock trailers pulled onto the Lawson farm, 3 days later, word had already spread through the county. At the Rusty Plow diner, the local farmers openly mocked the decision. Alessia had walked in to pick up a hydraulic hose fitting, only to hear Tom Barrett, a loyal contractor for Gonzalo West, holding court at the corner booth. I give her a month before those cows are buzzard food, Tom laughed, stirring his coffee. Arthur Lawson is probably spinning in his grave. She traded a $250,000 case combine for a bunch of rodeo rejects. She's fencing them into the devil's armpit down in the gulch. Absolute madness. Alessia had paid for her fitting, kept her head high, and walked out without a word. She didn't care about the whispers. She stood by the reinforced gates of Miller's Gulch later that afternoon as the trailer ramps dropped. What poured out of the steel cages wasn't the fat, docile Angus cattle the locals were used to. These were 70 head of raw, nervous energy. They were lean, muscular, and prehistoric-looking, with sweeping horns and hides the color of dried blood and burnt earth. They hit the ground moving, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust as they snorted at the dry, oppressive air. They looked like they climbed out of hell, Samuel muttered, holding a sorting stick defensively as one of the larger steers fixed him with a wild, dark eye. They look exactly like what we need, Alessia said, unlatching the heavy iron gate that led down into the impenetrable green wall of the gulch. Using 2 borrowed cattle dogs, Alessia and Samuel pushed the herd into the ravine. The cattle didn't hesitate. Driven by hunger and a natural instinct to seek cover from the blazing sun, they plunged into the thicket of thorns and buckthorn. Within minutes, all 70 head had vanished into the dense undergrowth. The only evidence they were there was the sound of snapping branches, the tearing of leaves, and an occasional low bellow echoing off the ravine walls. The first 3 weeks were a psychological torture for Alessia. The drought deepened, baking the earth until wide fissures opened in the soil. The temperature hovered around 104 degrees for 10 consecutive days. Every morning she and Samuel hauled a water tank down to the edge of the gulch to fill the troughs, terrified that they would find dead cattle tangled in the briars. But they didn't. Instead, they saw the destruction. The herd was a living, breathing bulldozer. Desperate for calories, the Coincidental crosses devoured the invasive vegetation with a violent efficiency. They chewed through the thick vines of poison ivy, snapped the branches off the honey locusts, and trampled the wild blackberry bushes into a pulpy ruin under their heavy hooves. By mid-September, the change was undeniable. What had once been an impenetrable wall of thorns had been pushed back over 30 yards. The cattle were surprisingly healthy. Their ribs still showed, but they had muscle tone, and their coats were thick. They were thriving on the very weeds that were choking the land. Gonzalo West, however, wasn't deterred. One afternoon, he rode his horse, a beautiful, useless, purebred Arabian, down to the fence line where Alessia was repairing a snapped, high-tensile wire. "I hear your goats are eating the weeds, Abby," Gonzalo called out, an amused smirk on his face. "It's a cute parlor trick, but clearing out a trash ravine isn't going to save the farm. You're out of money, you're out of time, and the water table is so low, the county is cutting off the main supply pipe next week." Alessia gripped her fencing pliers until her knuckles turned white. "We're doing fine, Greg. Are you?" He pointed to her dying fields with a leather riding crop. "Your corn is dust, your beans are dust. When the county cuts the water, those ugly cows of yours will die of thirst in 2 days. Last chance, Abby. 700,000 for the whole plot. You take it, or you walk away with nothing but debts and dead cows in October." He wheeled his horse around and trotted away before she could answer. The sickening reality of his words settled heavy in her stomach. He was right about the water. The municipal line was their only source for the troughs. If the county shut it off, she couldn't afford to truck water in daily. The cattle would die. The stress began to visibly age her. She stopped sleeping. She spent her nights sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkness of the gulch, listening to the cattle crushing the brush, wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She had risked her father's legacy on a desperate gamble, and the weather was calling her bluff. On the morning of September 28th, Samuel drove his quad bike back up to the main house. He was driving faster than usual, the engine whining in protest as he hit the ruts. He slammed the brakes, kicking up a cloud of dust, and killed the engine. He practically fell off the bike, his chest heaving, his face pale underneath his tan. "Abby!" he yelled, running toward the porch. "Abby, you need to come down to the gulch right now." Alessia dropped the ledger she was holding. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Did the fence break? Did they get out? "No," Samuel said, trying to catch his breath. "They pushed all the way to the back, to the canyon wall. They ate through the blackberry patch that's been there since your granddaddy's time. You need to see what they uncovered." Alessia jumped onto the back of the quad, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. A sinkhole? A toxic dump site left by previous generations. They rode down the bumpy dirt track toward the gulch. The landscape was unrecognizable. Where there was once a solid mass of green and brown thorns, there was now open, trampled earth, dotted with stripped tree trunks. The cattle had cleared nearly 40 acres of the most hostile terrain on the property. Samuel navigated the quad deep into the newly opened space, steering around the grazing cattle until they reached the far northern edge of the ravine, a steep, rocky incline that had been hidden from human eyes for decades. The cattle were gathered in a tight circle near the base of the rock wall, sniffing the ground and stomping their hooves. Samuel parked the quad and grabbed his sorting stick, gently pushing the massive beasts aside. Alessia followed close behind. As the herd parted, Alessia saw it. It wasn't a sinkhole. It was a structure. Lying flush against the rock wall was a massive circular perimeter of hand-hewn limestone blocks, measuring nearly 12 feet across. Over decades it had been swallowed by the earth, buried under 3 feet of dead vines, leaves, and thorny bramble. But the cattle, in their relentless search for food, had scraped away the vegetation, exposing the stone. In the exact center of the stone circle sat a massive rusted iron cap, bolted down with heavy, antiquated, square-headed bolts. "What is this?" Alessia breathed, falling to her knees and running her hands over the cold, ancient limestone. "I haven't seen one of these since I was a boy in the Panhandle," Samuel whispered, stepping up beside her. He took off his hat, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Abby, I think your grandfather, or maybe his father, I think they capped an old artesian well." And judging by the size of this iron plate, Samuel trailed off, but he didn't need to finish the sentence. The air around the stone circle felt distinctly different. It was cool, a faint, unmistakable smell of damp earth and deep, sweet moisture radiated from the edges of the rusted iron. Alessia stared at the cap, her mind spinning as the sheer magnitude of what they had found hit her. If this was what Samuel thought it was, they hadn't just cleared 80 acres of land. They had found the bloodline of the earth. The rusted, square-headed bolts, locking the massive iron cap to the limestone foundation, had not been turned since the days of the First World War. They were fossilized in place by decades of oxidation and hardened earth. Alessia and Samuel did not waste time trying to turn them. They drove the heavy flatbed truck down into the freshly cleared gulch, the bed loaded with an oxyacetylene torch, heavy chains, and a portable generator. The 70 head of Coincidental Brahmin cattle watched from the perimeter, chewing lazily on buckthorn branches, entirely unfazed by the sudden intrusion of machinery into their newly claimed territory. Samuel fired up the torch, adjusting the valves until a sharp, screaming blue cone of flame hissed from the brass nozzle. He knelt beside the ancient stone circle and applied the heat directly to the first bolt. "Stand back, Abby," Samuel warned over the roar of the torch. "If there's trapped methane down there from organic decay, this whole thing could turn into a Roman candle." Alessia stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. For 3 hours the gulch echoed with the sound of cracking iron and the hiss of the cutting torch. One by one, Samuel severed the thick iron bolts, kicking the glowing red slag into the dirt. When the final bolt gave way with a sharp snap, an eerie silence fell over the ravine. The air seemed to hold its breath. "Chain it up," Alessia ordered, her voice tight with anticipation. They wrapped thick, galvanized steel logging chains around the iron lifting loops, forged into the cap, securing the other end to the hitch of the heavy flatbed truck. Alessia climbed into the driver's seat, shifted into four-wheel drive low, and gently eased her foot onto the accelerator. The chains pulled taut. The truck's suspension groaned. For a terrifying second, the tires spun in the loose dirt, kicking up dust. Then, with a deafening metallic screech that sent the cattle scattering into the brush, the ancient seal broke. The iron cap flipped backward, landing in the dirt with a ground-shaking thud. What followed wasn't a trickle, it was a roar. A column of crystal-clear, ice-cold water violently erupted from the darkness of the limestone shaft, shooting 10 feet into the blistering afternoon air. The sheer force of the pressure was staggering. The water cascaded down, instantly turning the parched, cracked earth of the gulch into a dark, muddy oasis. The smell of sweet, untainted mineral water filled the oppressive heat, a scent the farm hadn't known in nearly a year. Alessia leapt out of the truck and ran to the edge of the blast. The water soaked her clothes, washed the dirt from her face, and felt colder than winter ice. She laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and relief, as Samuel fell to his knees in the mud, cupping his hands and drinking deeply. "Artesian," Samuel yelled over the roar of the geyser. "It's a pressurized artesian well. It must tap directly into the deep bedrock of the Oakhaven aquifer. The pressure is incredible." They had found a miracle, but in Oakhaven County, miracles rarely went unnoticed by those who wanted them for themselves. Less than 24 hours later, the dust trail of Gonzalo West's King Ranch pickup appeared on the horizon, followed closely by a sleek black sedan bearing the county government seal. Gonzalo had eyes everywhere, and Tom Barrett, his loyal contractor, had seen the water shooting into the air from the county highway. Gonzalo stepped out of his truck, stepping gingerly to avoid the newly formed stream that was already working its way down the gulch. He wasn't smiling anymore. Beside him was the county water commissioner, a nervous-looking man named Richard Kemp, clutching a leather briefcase. "Shut it down, Alessia," Gonzalo demanded, dispensing with his usual patronizing charm. His eyes were fixed on the geyser, wide with a mixture of awe and absolute greed. "Get off my property, Gonzalo." "You're trespassing," Alessia said, standing firmly between the men and the well. I'm not trespassing, Miss Lawson," Commissioner Kemp said, stepping forward. "I'm here in an official capacity. Under the current Oakhaven County emergency drought mandate, all newly discovered subterranean water sources must be capped and surrendered to municipal control to preserve the water table. You are in violation of county law." Alessia's blood ran cold. "This isn't a new source. It's a grandfathered well on private land." "Do you have the original permits?" Kemp asked, opening his briefcase. "Because county records show no active well in Miller's Gulch. If you can't produce a historic severance deed proving your family retained exclusive, unregulated water rights before the 1930 Municipal Water Act, this well belongs to the county." Gonzalo crossed his arms, his smirk returning. "You have 24 hours to produce the paperwork, Abby. Otherwise, the county caps it and you're back to dust. And let me remind you, if the county takes the water, the bank will immediately reevaluate the value of your remaining collateral. They'll call in your balloon payment by Friday." Alessia watched them drive away, her hands trembling. She had the water, but the bureaucratic machine was moving to steal it from under her feet. The Lawson farmhouse became a war room. Alessia and Samuel tore through 80 years of accumulated paperwork, hauling dusty bankers' boxes out of the attic. They were looking for a needle in a haystack of tax returns, seed receipts, and old mechanical manuals. They needed proof that her great-grandfather had legally separated the water rights from the surface rights before the county government had established its modern monopolies. As the sun rose on the second day, bringing with it another suffocating wave of heat, Alessia sat on the floor, surrounded by yellowed paper. Her eyes were bloodshot. She pulled a brittle, leather-bound ledger from the bottom of the final box. Tucked inside the back cover was a folded, heavy-stock parchment document sealed with red wax. It was dated October 14th, 1912. Deed of severance and perpetual right. Be it known that Elias Arthur Lawson retains absolute, uninfringed, and perpetual ownership of all subterranean waters, aquifers, and subterranean rivers beneath the boundaries of the Lawson estate, exempt from any future municipal seizure or collective rationing. We have it, Alessia whispered, a tear cutting a clean line down her dusty cheek. Sam, we have it. But winning the legal battle was only half the war. Gonzalo West, realizing his bureaucratic theft had failed when Alessia filed the injunction at the courthouse, played his final, most ruthless card. He used his corporate leverage to buy Alessia's debt from the local bank. On Wednesday morning, a courier delivered a notice of immediate acceleration. Because Alessia had drastically altered the landscape of the property, clearing the gulch with livestock, Gonzalo's lawyers claimed a breach of the loan's maintenance covenants. The ultimatum: total debt, $312,000. Deadline, 72 hours. Consequence: immediate foreclosure and seizure of the land. He doesn't just want the land anymore, Samuel said, staring at the foreclosure notice. He wants the well. His own megafarm is dying because the county restricted his municipal pipe. He needs your water to save his corporate empire, and he's going to steal your farm to get it. Alessia looked out the window. The cattle were grazing peacefully in the newly lush, muddy gulch. She had the most valuable resource in the state pouring out of the ground at 1,000 gallons a minute. But she had no infrastructure to sell it, no pipelines to transport it, and only 3 days to turn it into $300,000. Then she turned on the local news. The anchor's voice was grim. The Silver Creek wildfire has broken containment lines in the neighboring county. State fire apparatus are struggling due to the severe drought, and local reservoirs are critically low. Aerial tankers are currently grounded due to lack of drafting sources. Alessia didn't hesitate. She grabbed the phone and dialed the State Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. "My name is Alessia Lawson," she told the desperate dispatcher on the other end. "I have an uncapped, high-pressure artesian well producing massive volume, and I have 80 acres of cleared flat land for heavy tanker trucks to turn around. I want to sell you the water, but you have to bring your own pumps." Within 6 hours, the Lawson farm transformed into a militarized staging ground. The State Fire Service arrived with a fleet of massive Type 1 water tenders. The sheer volume of the well was staggering. It filled the 3,000-gallon trucks in minutes without losing pressure. State helicopters equipped with Bambi buckets hovered over a massive, hastily dug retention pond that the fire dozers carved into the gulch, drafting the icy artesian water and flying off toward the smoke on the horizon. The state didn't just buy the water, they bought it at an emergency premium. The rescue operation log. Day 1, 40 tanker loads dispatched. Helicopters draft continuously. Day 2, neighboring county municipalities hearing of the water source send fleets of commercial water haulers to purchase emergency drinking supplies. Day 3, the total gross revenue from water sales clears $450,000. On Friday morning, exactly 2 hours before the foreclosure deadline, Alessia walked into the sleek, air-conditioned offices of West Agri Corp. She didn't wear a dress or a suit. She wore her dusty boots, faded jeans, and a work shirt. Gonzalo West was sitting behind his mahogany desk, already filling out the foreclosure transfer paperwork. He looked up, feigning a sad smile. "Abby, I'm sorry it had to end this way. But business is business." Alessia reached into her back pocket, pulled out a certified cashier's check for $312,000 and dropped it onto his desk. "Business is business, Greg," she said, her voice steady and absolute. "The debt is paid in full. The lien is cleared." Gonzalo stared at the check, the color completely draining from his face. His mouth opened but no words came out. He knew where the money came from. He knew he had lost. "Oh, and one more thing," Alessia added, placing a second piece of paper on his desk. "I noticed your corn is completely dead, and your livestock are dropping. Since the county shut off your water yesterday, I thought you might need some help. That's a contract to buy water from the Lawson well. I've set the price at triple the municipal rate. Take it or leave it." She turned and walked out of the office before he could reply, leaving the titan of Oak Haven County sitting in stunned, humiliated silence. By late October, the drought finally broke with a massive thunderstorm that soaked the region. But the Lawson farm was already thriving. The 80 acres of Miller's Gulch, once a hostile wasteland of thorns, was now a lush, vibrant green pasture, fed by the constant, cool flow of the artesian well. The 70s scrawny, half-starved cattle that had been the laughing stock of the county were now fat, healthy, and grazing contentedly in the sunshine. They had eaten the thorns, uncovered the past, and secured the future. Alessia stood on her porch, no longer looking out at a dying legacy, but at an empire reborn from the dust. If you love this incredible true story of grit, survival, and outsmarting the greedy corporate giants, make sure to hit that like button. It helps us bring you more amazing tales of agricultural triumph. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a great underdog story, and subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss out on our upcoming farm and ranch deep dives. We'll see you next time.